Welcome to the second part of week two's lectures. Now we've talked about things like logical and causal possibility, and these have just helped to shape a framework so that we can start getting into argumentation. Because argumentation in many ways is the primary tool that's in a philosopher's toolbox. If you're going to make an argument in philosophy, you need to know how to do it well. And if you're going to examine an argument, you need to be able to utilize the proper formatting. And so with philosophical argumentation, there is a standard form that we typically use. The first thing that we need to have is the claim. Now a claim is simply a conclusion. So in your book, it tends to use the example that ghosts exist as a primary option. This is your claim. This is your conclusion. This is what you land at after you've looked at the evidence. Now the evidence, or the reasons, which are called your premises, are offered in support of the claim. So we would typically say, therefore ghosts exist, based on, in your book again it says, I have heard strange noises in my room. That would be a primary reason or premise to this idea that ghosts do or do not exist. Now, the reason that we use standard form is to assess the value of arguments. This requires listing all of your premises in numbered, sequential order, and then making a conclusion. So, for example, if we were going to say that ghosts exist, we would say, number one, here's my first reason. I've heard strange noises in my room. Number two, I've seen unexplained events. And number three, and then once we have made all of our premises, we would say, therefore, ghosts exist. Again, this is merely an argumentation from your book, so that way you can go back through and see what they're talking about there. But we have listed in sequential order our premises, and we have then made a conclusion based on that. So if it were, I have heard strange noises in my room, we would be utilizing this format in order to determine whether this argument is reasonable or not. There are two types of arguments that we might be making. The first argument would be deductive reasoning. The goal in deductive reasoning is to offer such strong support that if these premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. I am standing in this room. I am teaching philosophy and ethics. Therefore, I must be the philosophy and ethics teacher. This would be a deductive argument when we say that if these are true, this has to be true as well. The second form of argumentation is inductive reasoning. The goal with inductive reasoning is to provide support for the conclusion such that if the premises are true, then the conclusion is very likely true as well. You'll notice a subtle shift between the certainty of deductive reasoning and the likelihood language of inductive reasoning. So when we're evaluating deductive arguments, the question to ask is it valid? If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. So is it valid? Does it have logical form? Is it reasonable to assume? So there are four different types of deductive arguments that might be used. You'll need to refer to your book to see examples of these because the language around them may be a little bit confusing at first. The four types are modus ponens, modus tollens, disjunctive syllogism, and hypothetical syllogism. Modus ponens very simply says, if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. If we were to put it into logical form, if P then Q, P, therefore Q. If I am standing at this podium teaching, I must be the professor. I'm standing at this podium teaching, therefore I must be the professor. A simple example. Modus tollens looks a little different. It says, if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. If I am standing at this podium, I must be the professor. I am not standing at this podium, therefore I must not be the professor. You'll see it's a little bit opposite than modus ponens. Disjunctive syllogism works a little bit differently. It says, excuse me, either P or Q, not Q, therefore P. Either I must be the professor, or I'm just standing here talking to myself, which in this case might actually be true. I'm not just standing here talking to myself, therefore I must be the professor. And the last one is hypothetical syllogism. It says, if P then Q, if Q then R, therefore if P then R. Now don't get confused in all the alphabetical, mathematical terms with this. The basis of this is that if the first item is true, the second item is true. If the second item is true, the third item is true. So therefore, if the first one is true, the third or final must also be true as well. Now when we evaluate inductive arguments, the basic idea is how probable is it? Higher probability leads to stronger arguments. Excuse me again. And lower probability leads to weaker arguments. If it is highly probable that something might take place so that you might have the right answer, then your argument is more likely or stronger and more likely to be true. The last couple things that you want to look at with your philosophical tools are the principle of conservatism and Occam's razor. Now, Occam's razor is one that you've probably seen in television shows. I know of several different medical-based shows, House, Scrubs, and etc., over the last 10 or 20 years that have based entire episodes around Occam's razor. It's a very simple premise that says simple theories are usually the right thing. The simplest answer is usually the right answer. So if you are looking at a multitude of complex answers and there exists one simple explanation, usually the simplest answer is true. So let's take back the idea of ghosts exist. Let's say your options are, I have heard strange noises in my room last night. Well, what could possibly be causing those strange noises? If you have the option between ghosts, which is a broad concept of the afterlife that may or may not be true, or maybe a leaky faucet, you would probably lean towards the leaky faucet at first as the probable explanation. It doesn't always mean it's the right one, but again, the simple theories are usually the right answer. Now, the principle of conservatism says that conclusions, such as therefore ghosts must exist, must be compatible with pre-existing beliefs. So, for example, if we were to look at do ghosts exist based on a Christian worldview, we would have to understand what pre-existing beliefs go into that theory. So, for example, do Christians believe that once we die, we go and face the judgment? Do we believe that there's an intermediary period where souls are allowed to just wander the earth? Or do we believe that there is no afterlife whatsoever? The principle of conservatism would say we must look at and examine those background beliefs to truly understand what we are saying. These are some basic philosophical tools. I know that they're confusing at first, so I would advise you to read through your book a couple times and really get to where you understand these different views, these different formats. The basic understanding you need is to be able to put things into standard form, however. You will be required on one of your upcoming assignments to utilize standard form to understand an argument that's being made. Because you'll notice when argumentation takes place, you're not typically going to have someone walk up and say, point 1 is this, point 2 is this, point 3 is this, therefore, here's the answer. But they will typically do this in an unobtrusive way. They will be speaking and you will see, here's their first argument, here's their second argument, and here is their ultimate conclusion. And that is what you'll need to begin understanding to have handle of this philosophical tool.